So, Assalamu alaikum and good day to everyone. Now we will going to discuss about the language universals, specifically on communicative competence by Del Hymes. Objectives or objective. At the end of the lesson, colleagues are able to know the brief biography of Del Hymes and how communicative competence emerged during his career. Understand the communicative competence and its four components. Identify and analyze the vital role of 8 components of speaking mnemonic or model. Himes was born in Portland, Oregon on the 7th of June 1937. Died on the 13th of November 2009 in Charlottesville, Virginia due to the complications of his Alzheimer's disease. He was a linguist, sociolinguist, anthropologist, and folklorist. One of his major works are Two Types of Linguistic Relativity, that was published in 1966, on communicative competence, which was published on 1972. His work in the Army as a decoder is part of what influenced him to become a linguist. Some of influences on his works on American tradition, uh, there are, they are Franz Boas, Edward Sapir, and Harry Hoyger. Prague Linguistic Circle, um, Roman Jacobson, then the sociologist who influenced on his work is Irving Goffman, and the ethnomethodologist Harold Garfinkel, Harvey Sachs, Emmanuel Shegloff, and Gail Jefferson. So Hines basically um, he pioneered the study of the relationship between language and social context. He focused on poetics, the poetic organization of Native American oral narratives. So Himes is best known for his founding role of the ethnography of communication, which describes a new approach to understand language in use. Basically, um, this ethnography of communication, this is where the communicative competence emerged and elaborated well. So there are many um, concepts that discuss in ethnography of communication. So let's proceed to communicative competence and the speaking mnemonic models. So let's have first the communicative competence. So it was coined by Del Hymes in 1966. So this term was first used by Del Hymes in 1966 in his lecture delivered in a research planning conference on developing the language of the disadvantaged children. Then it was published as a paper entitled On Communicative Competence and in 1972. Then eventually in 2001 it was republished as well. So communicative competence, it affirms that the study of language must concern itself with describing and analyzing the ability of the native speakers to use the language for communication in real situations. So it is not more on linguistic competence that um, Noam Chomsky's claim. So he introduces motion communicative competence. We're talking about Delheim's in contrast to Chomsky's distinction between competence and performance. For Chomsky, competence is the ideal speaker-listener knowledge of his language. He argued that the focus of the linguistic theory is to characterize the abstract abilities of the speaker-listener, which enable him to produce grammatically correct sentences. But for Himes, He points out that communicative competence doesn't only represent the grammatical competence but also the social the social linguistic competence of the language or the speaker itself. He has stated that there are rules of use without which the rules of grammar would be useless. And he defined communicative competence as the tacit knowledge of the language and the ability to use it for the communication. Himes believes that knowledge of language structure and sociocultural rules are both important in language acquisition. A learner acquires knowledge of language not only as grammatical but also as appropriate to the social context. He or she acquires competence as to when to speak, when no, and as to what to talk about with whom, where, when, and in what manner. That's according to Himes. By this discussion, Himes, Himes shows that grammatical knowledge or the linguistic knowledge in Chomsky's linguistic theory is not sufficient enough to explain the child's competence to accomplish communication needs. So based on his above mentioned or aforementioned discussion, Himes reaches a point that for the theory of language and language use to be developed, the judgment and abilities must be recognized not only in grammaticality and acceptability, as in Chomskyan model of competence and performance, but in four levels. So he suggests this framework for integrating linguistic theory. So later on, you will see what are those theories of communication that he mentioned on this framework. So there are four. So let's proceed. Later on, you will see it on the slide. So if we will have to compare the linguistic and communicative competence, let's have first the question, what do you as a language learner think is the goal of language course? So let's have the probable answer might be, it is to teach the grammar and vocabulary of that language. Probably. So another question, what is your own personal goal as a second language learner? Could be. So let's have probable answer. It is to be able to communicate in the second language of your choice. So this is what I said a while ago. As Himes observes, a normal child acquires knowledge of sentences, not only as grammatical, but also as appropriate. He or she acquires competence as to when to speak, when not, and as to what to talk about with whom, when, where, in what manner. In short, a child becomes able to accomplish a repertoire of speech acts, to take part in speech events, and to evaluate their accomplishment by others. So later on, we will talk about the speech acts and speech events as we go along with our discussion. So this is what I said a while ago, the theory of communicative competence, that the framework of theory of communicative competence by the Himes. First, we have the possibility. It is to able to produce whether and to what degree something is formally possible. Second, the feasibility, able to decode the language. It is whether and to what degree something is feasible in virtue of means of implementation available. So the third one is the appropriateness, able to use and evaluate correctly. Whether and to what degree something is appropriate in relation to a context in which it is used and evaluated. And lastly, we have the performance. The utterance is completed. completed, or the language communication task is completed. It is whether and to what degree something done actually performed and what it's doing entails. So that's the theory of communicative competence. So these are the framework for integrating linguistic theory with theory of communication and culture. So these are the four theory that uh, Delheims proposed. So as additional, um, these four components of communicative competence was later on, this will be an additional information because this one was later on discussed by some of the scholars. But for us to understand well the communicative competence, let's have it first. So first one is the linguistics. We have linguistics, discourse, social linguistic, and strategic. So let's have first the linguistic competence. It is the knowledge of the language code. Example is grammar and vocabulary. So basically, this one was the theory of Chomsky, right? So it is, for example, it's the grammar and vocabulary, and also of the convention of this written representation, script, and orthography. So grammar components includes phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. So let's have you all know what phonetics is, phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. So let's get through our presentation or discussion. Next one is social linguistic competence. It is the knowledge of sociocultural rules of use, example, knowing how to use and respond to language appropriately. So this one, the theory of appropriateness. So appropriateness depends on what the political correct term would be for something, how a specific attitude is expressed, the topic, the setting of the communication, knowing what the taboos are, what politeness indices are used. So, so let's proceed. So the third one is the discourse competence. It is the knowledge of how to produce and comprehend oral or written text in the modes of speaking or writing and listening or reading respectively. It is knowing how to combine language structures into a cohesive and coherent oral or written text of different types. So basically, the discourse competence deals with organizing words, phrases, and sentences in order to create conversations, speeches, poetry, email, messages, newspaper articles, and etc. So that's the discourse competence. So let's proceed to the strategic competence. It is the ability to recognize and repair communication breakdowns before, during, or after they occur. So, for instance, um, we have the paraphrasing when may not know the certain words, keeping communication channel open when there is a communication gaps or hindrance. So that's the strategic competence. So basically, this one is more on how to repair or to maintain the communication channel during the conversation. So that's the strategic competence. So let's go to the speaking mnemonic or model. So this one is a well-known legacy to language education. So this is a valuable model developed by Himes to help the ethnographers of communication frame their investigation of speech acts and events. This is widely accepted in the ethnography of education. So Himes offers the mnemonic device of the speaking grid as a heuristic, though it is by no means his most significant contribution to social linguistics. The speaking grid is perhaps the artifact most associated with Himes as his popular legacy. So this is one of the popular legacies of Del Himes. The speaking grid has been widely accepted in the ethnography of communication. So this typographical error, I put it there, the education. That's communication instead. So, and this speaking mnemonic or model has been further developed into discrete research question by Heinz former students such as Joel Scherger and Regna Darnell. So, the 8 components of speaking mnemonic are first, the setting and scene, and D for participants, E for ends, and A for act sequence, K for key, and I for instruments or instrumentalities, and for norms, and G for genre. So let's get to it one by one. So if we will uh, talk about setting and scene in linguistics, social linguistics, that's what we call it. This includes the time and place, the physical aspect of the situation, such as the arrangement of furniture and etc. So let's have the example to identify what is the setting and what is the scene. Oh, so which shows the setting or the scene. So we have here a White House, then we have here a group of people in dining area. So which shows setting, which shows scene. So basically the setting is in the White House. So the scene is this one, group of people in dining area, maybe they are family or what. So within that scene, there's a conversation. So later on, we will discuss about that. So let's go back. So um, participants identity including personal or the characteristics of the um, persons or individual involved in on the conversation, such as let's consider what are their age and sex, social status, relationship with each other. So that's the participants. And let's go to ends. Ends includes the purpose of the event itself as well as the individual goal or individual goals of the participants or their individual outcomes. So that's the end. So let's have the act or a sequence. Act sequence or how speech acts are organized within a speech event and what topics are addressed. So that's the act sequence. So let's have the key. Key or the tone and manner in which something is said or written. So that's the key. Instruments or instrumentalities or the linguistic code. Example, what are the language, dialect, variety of channel used? Example, on the variety of channel used, or no, on the channel used, the speech or writing. So let's have the norms. Norm are the standard sociocultural rules of interaction and interpretation. And lastly, the genre. Genre are type of events such as what is the lecture, poem, or letter. So that's the genre. So let's proceed to the um, speech economy. So let's always remember that the speaking mnemonic or model is used on investigating the speech acts and speech events in a speech community. So let's get to know what are those speech acts, speech event, speech community. So this is where the speaking mnemonic or model is used. So this will help the ethnographers of communication to investigate what are the meaning of those language communication they are inclined into. So let's proceed. So speech economy is a set of relationships within a speech community. So that is the speech economy. What is a speech community? The speech community is a community sharing rules for the conduct and interpretation of the speech and rules for the interpretation of at least one linguistic variety. So in the case of Himes, he worked his work was more on the Native American speakers. So it is another topic as well. So it is a broad study that he conducted with the Native American speakers. So we have as well the speech situation. It is the socially contextual situation. We have as well the speech event occurs within speech situation. We have also the speech acts um, that are the individual utterances that form the minimal unit of analysis for ethnographies of communication. So let's have an example so that you will understand well what are these. To illustrate the three terms, Himes offered an example of speech situation. So basically, if you look into the speech community, there's a party. So that's a speech situation in a speech community. So there in a party, there's a conversation during a party. So that's the speech event. After that, there's a joke. No, there's a joke within the conversation. So that's the speech act. So if we look if we take a look on this, so this is basically what do you call this one, illustrated in this speech economy. So that's the speech economy. Then under that, the speech community, and under the speech community, the speech situation, speech event, and the speech act. Oh, so these are the references of what we have discussed today. So if we have any questions, so later on, maybe we could address it on our class with Servo. So thank you for today, and thank you for all your support and for keeping the spirit alive while listening to this. So I know you have a lot in mind now. So that's all for today. I hope you understand um, the what communicative competence is and the other works of Delheims that is relative to communicative competence. So have a good day to everyone and assalamu alaikum.